Go for liftoff in T-minus 30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at will.
Hey, thanks for stopping by this morning or afternoon or evening, whatever it might be, whether you're going to watch live. It's a weird time for a show for me, kind of like when I had Monica on. We did it on a Saturday. Well, it was Saturday morning for her and Saturday afternoon for me. But I don't do these on Saturdays very often. But my guest, Hrvoje, and I'm going to say his name 1,000 times, and it's going to be different every single time. And you guys will know why as soon as I bring him in. But this worked for him on a Saturday, and he was very upfront and honest. He says, "I'm not a morning person, so this may be early morning for him." The funny thing is we were both dealing with some sort of throat thing this morning, and my solution is bone broth, as some of you know. I sip it for the show from time to time, unless it's in the evening. And then I might be sipping an adult beverage for my evening shows. But you guys know my merch. Check out the coffee. Order something from me here. You guys, especially if you're in the northern climes, you're going to want a really nice mug to drink your hot products out of while you watch me in the winter in Minnesota or Michigan or wherever you might be. Today's show, the topic is going to be about Q, not in particular the Anons. And some of you don't know, Q is the person or persons or group that are behind the storm. They're ushering in the storm. And the Anons, the QAnons, are the people who follow, or the people who watch and wait and are trusting the plan. And then there are Q bakers. And the Q bakers are the people who take the Q drops and build the information and come up with these reasonable plans, right? What's going to happen in all of this. So you have Q bakers, you have QAnons. Some people follow loosely, some people follow lightly. And then you have what I have now euphemistically come to call the Q-a-kooks. And the Q-a-kooks are the people who will attack you for even saying Q without genuflecting and bowing in reverence to his high and holy nature, or their high and holy nature, whoever they are. And I have been reticent to give any kind of credence to anything that Q has had to say. And I've been digging into it for a while, and I was listening to Monica on her show the other day, and Q came up in passing, and my guest said some things, and I'm like, I gotta have him on, because one of the things, if you saw the description of the video on Facebook, one of the things that's been leveled at me is I'm ignorant, uneducated, stupid, I'm a child of Satan, I am a deep stater, I'm controlled opposition. All of these things by people who are supposed to be my friends, who are also QAnons and Q followers, and some of them are Q-a-kooks. Because I don't follow Q. So I am stupid and uneducated and ignorant. So I'm going to bring on somebody who is none of those things, and we're going to have what could be, if you're willing to sit down and listen to it, an eye-opening conversation. Hrvoje, I got it right.
You did. Good morning, Minnesota, and yeah.
Well, and other reaches. I even reach England sometimes.
Yes, and the rest of the world. And as you might hear, I've got a bit of a sore throat, so we'll see if we can power through this.
Well, I appreciate you not canceling.
I'd like to, fulfill my commitments. So
So your description says that you are a Croatian-American-Mexican.
You got it. I was born in the States, but I'm of Croatian extraction. My parents are Croatian immigrants, and I've lived between the two countries, moving back and forth. And my name literally means Croatian. So, and I identify more first as a Croatian than an American. You know, I always use an example like, imagine the Mexican being born in the U.S. They speak Spanish. They eat Mexican food. You know, their relatives are all Mexican. Well, are you really American or Mexican? Ethnically, you're Mexican. So that's how I see myself as a Croatian American. And I came to Mexico over a decade ago and just became a naturalized Mexican citizen. So a proud Mexican citizen.
So, and you're a minimalist.
Yeah, overall. And I mean, that comes more from my just Christian conviction,
Mhm.
you know, of not stuff is not important, you know, material stuff, and just you know, just I just it just seemed logical just being a minimalist. So I don't like stuff. I like experiences. That's why I travel so much. I just like I think I value more experiences over stuff.
Yeah, well, which I kind of got a kick out of when you said that, and it works well for you in Mexico. Because your lifestyle, you can actually support yourself better in Mexico on the way you do things versus how if you were trying to live in the States.
I mean, in general, it's just lower cost of living. I mean, I've had on my TNT show, maybe you know him. I'm forgetting it, Randy from Soundwave promo. He's a middle class couple from the U.S. and they just moved down to Mexico, and that just like that increases your savings like by 20, 30, 40, 50%. So it's just, you know, logical.
Well, and just so people are aware, is like not all of Mexico is like border Mexico where all the drug wars and everything are happening and whatnot. So there are actually safe parts of Mexico. It's you say that to the average white guy in the States, and you're like, are you living at a resort?
I mean, I've been here for a decade, so I'm still here. So
And you still have a picture of one of the founding fathers on your wall.
there you go. Yeah.
Yes. So you have a bit of an education,
Yeah, master's degree, you know.
right? But I mean, it's you come to philosophy, you come to socio-cultural, socio-political topics with some background because this has been a field of study for you for some time.
More so, I mean, history, you know, religion, history, politics, economics, maybe a little less so philosophy, but yeah, philosophy as well. So, yeah.
So where did you, for the audience who hasn't read the video description, because you know how people are with YouTube, um, where did you study and what was your field of study in particular when you went for your master's? And
Well, my undergraduate was in Illinois, a smaller college, Northeastern, history and education, and then I did Peace Corps, Mongolia, uh, for about a year, a little over a year. I left early because I was just sort of young and just I don't know how you describe it. I loved Mongolia, but just for some reason I was getting homesick or nostalgic, and then I studied it in Geneva at a small, relatively new, a private school called the Geneva School of Diplomacy. Studied international relations, and I was around a lot of fancy diplomats. You know, one of my classmates was the son of China's UN ambassador, which is a high post. I mean, China's ambassador to the UN at the time, his son was my classmate, and you know, Saddam Hussein's defense lawyer was my teacher. You know, Yasser Arafat's brother-in-law, Alfred de Zayas, who I still chat with, former UN Special Rapporteur, who's often on, you know, RT, and so people like this. So this is, you know, I studied for a year, and then I went to Mexico. I applied for jobs everywhere, like literally from Mongolia to Afghanistan, or I was thinking of applying, you know, Saudi Arabia, Alaska. I just ended up in Mexico because I didn't want to because, you know, once you uncover deep state, deep politics, it's like, I don't want to work for these corrupt, you know, satanic organizations, you know, United Nations, world government, and I wanted to do something where I didn't have to compromise and go into teaching, where you don't have to compromise. You can just teach. It's an honest profession, but that's not to say, if people want to get involved in politics, they should. I just at the time didn't feel like doing it, and there are people like Ron Paul is the easiest example where we need people in there to fight the good fight. I just didn't feel like doing it at the time. So
It's a fight that everybody can be in on their own level, in their own way, without necessarily being a politician. So, as an example, you have your podcast. You want to tell? Well, you have a couple of shows, so you just tell the people what those are and where they can find them real quick.
Yeah, I mean, as I was teaching, this podcast came out of an experiment out of the classroom because I was Skyping in the same type of people that I have on my podcast. I was Skyping into the classroom, and then I just said, why not make a podcast? And so Geopolitics is the podcast, and then since earlier this year, I got the gig to do TNT radio. That's live radio. Now it's 2 hours daily, and so as well, I interview a lot of fascinating people.
Yeah, and you are talking in both Geopolitics and Empire and with TNT. You are talking to people who have had their finger on the pulse of what is really kind of the sickening lifeblood behind what's driving the world, in the sense of who's really pulling strings. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, is because it's not like you are relying on Wikipedia for all of your information, and it's not like you're denying that there is a deep state. You're not denying that deep state exists across continents. You're saying that your experience it's there, but from your looking at it in particular, since we're here to talk about Q and your concerns with it, you're coming at it from a studied perspective, not in that you've had the deep dives into Q itself, but observing it, listening to it, seeing its impact across the United States and really the globe, because it has become a global phenomenon. But you also come at it from a conservative, liberty-minded perspective, as well as a deeply Christian background. Because if I remember what you said on Monica's show, you would maybe fall more in that Protestant evangelical, I don't know if it's Reformed type Christianity. So you really kind of are, in some respects, the antithesis to Q, in that in the United States, everything claiming Christianity, claiming to be patriotic, and you haven't been sucked into Q the way a lot of people who claim to be Christian and claim to be patriotic have been, especially in the States. So that was what was appealing to me about having you on. When did you become aware of the phenomenon, and what was your first response to what you were hearing?
Well, I can't recall exactly when, probably same as everyone else. It was a global phenomenon. I mean, largely in the U.S. and being an American, although outside of America, following everything, what's going on. For the first 5 minutes, I'll say symbolically, like it had me intrigued, right?
Right.
QAnon and a lot of. I listen to all sorts of mainstream and alt media, and some of the decent alt media was running with it, and so you kind of get sucked in. It's because it's a really sophisticated operation, and so it's just like it can really fool you. I mean, you got to hand it to them, and so I was intrigued initially, but then over time you start seeing things that don't add up, and then you there's a point where like, okay, yeah, something is really wrong here. This is not good. It's not a good thing from political perspective, from a Christian perspective. Something is way off the mark here. So, yeah.
Well, you used a word. It's a well-run operation. because you and I'm communicating with somebody else, and I'll name them at the end of this show because they've agreed to come on and talk about it as well. You have the same perspective that this individual does, and that others that I have talked to have, which is this isn't just some quack who thinks he's really got his finger on the pulse. You do believe there is somebody behind it. It's just not what everybody who follows it thinks it is.
I mean,
You're pretty convinced it's actually counterintelligence.
well, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it's like it can't be just one person. It's got to be a team. Like all the resources it takes to put stuff like this together, whether we can look at different things. Like, I mean, I still sort of think Bitcoin is probably coming from the same source or similar source, because you have all of these things that are anonymous, that are so well put together that I don't think like one person can create these sorts of things. It's a high level of intelligence, of of putting these systems together, then running them, resources, and so it's like sophisticated, basically team operation QAnon, and people reference Operation Trust in the early 1900s with what happened with the Bolsheviks against the Russian monarchy. And I found a paper. I thought it was interesting. An academic wrote a paper on it, and it was talking about Operation Trust to combat the threat of a Tsarist takeover and the return of the monarchy. Cheka developed a false flag operation to lure both Tsarist supporters and non-Russian foreign supporters into Russia to be dealt with. Codenamed Trust, the operation would span nearly a decade, fool almost everyone involved, and lead to the death or imprisonment of many people. And that's interesting because who ran that? It was the Bolsheviks, right? I like to call them the Jacobin Illuminist Bolsheviks. Is that atheist, anti-Christian ideology, that goes back to the founding of the real historical Illuminati, Masons and Jacobins. They want to destroy religion and bring in this sort of one-party, basically occult satanic system. And then who's basically running the U.S. today? A similar type, Bolshevik regime. So there are many parallels there, and
Operation Trust was interesting in its application as well, in that they had drops too, except their drops obviously weren't done on 4chan, 8chan, or 8kun or anything like that, or Reddit, but it was, oh, hey, have you seen this? And they'd pass this paper off and it would circulate. And that's how they were roping people in. And they were literally, as you were saying, it was meant to rope these people in so they could be identified, so they could be taken out.
And what I just read, where is it? I think I lost it. Where it was used it led to the imprisonment of many people. And so one other point I was going to bring up, like we have to look at what is the result of the whole Q phenomenon, the consequences. It's now being used to entrap, right? Almost imprison people, like January 6th. Basically, the MSM is saying anyone who's like supports Q is equated with domestic extremist terrorism, is a Nazi, is white supremacist, this sort of thing. And a lot of it most of it hasn't come true yet. And so, there's
we can't say it won't, because it's kind of like reading the Bible Code. Have you read that book?
No.
There's a book called the Bible Code, which goes back through, and it uses some sort of weird numerology to say, look, the Bible predicted that, the prime minister of Israel was going to be assassinated on such and such a day. Well, of course, it's a backwards looking prophecy. You can, he was assassinated. Let's see if the Bible Code predicted this, and then you can go and find the Bible Code that predicted it. We have a friend and a supporter who said Q became a sentient thing like the AI in a game. I think that's true.
I mean, I might liken it. They might be using AI like software, to glean stuff off the internet and manage the operation. So I don't think it's sentient, but they're probably using AI as part of a tool.
Well, it's funny that Kent said that in the way you see it, because there is a podcast out there that is definitely a left-wing podcast that definitely hates conservative and genuine, like Mises level libertarian style politics, that built a Q bot that does drops based on its algorithm studying previous Q drops. And every single one of the drops that this bot makes sounds identical to the way other actual Q drops have been worded and put out. And it does it with the same rhythm. And every once in a while, it'll throw out something, just completely weird related to the podcast. And so you could tell I've dove into aspects of this from a lot of different perspectives, and that's one of the reasons why I was looking for someone like you, is because it's hard to find somebody on the right who's willing to sit back and take a critical 10,000 foot view of it, or even a deeper look into it, without them going, I really feel I don't want to talk about it. Because a lot of the people who see it the way we do are just like, I just don't want to be involved. It's just too weird for me. And I have better things to do with my time, which is true, because the people who have been drawn into it spend a massive amount of time on it. I mean, and that's their thing. You have to research. You have to do your own research. If you would just do research the way I do research, then you would know. And we hear that all the time. We see that if you know, that's a big thing for them. And
I mean, one of my other biggest points is what you're talking about is it's very Gnostic. It's very occult. It's very esoteric. And I'm going to come out. For me, it's also like anti-Christian or satanic. I know there are well-meaning Christians getting caught up with it, but it's like, what are you doing with your time? Instead of reading the Bible, you're spending all your time decoding Q stuff on the internet. Like, just look at the results again, and like I said, it's being used to entrap people who otherwise would be, considered just normal patriots. It hasn't come true. It's diverting your resources and time. It's keeping people pacified, you know, instead of like, and I know there are Q people that have been motivated as a result of this to go do work in their local politics. That's true. But I think overall it's pacified people. Oh, don't do nothing. Just trust the plan. And I don't know if you caught, Rainer Fulmick, that German lawyer who's been doing these Corona committees for the past 2 years.
I know the name. I haven't caught much. Go ahead.
But yeah, I mean, there's a similarity there too, where there's this huge scandal just happened last week where that Corona committee split, and he may or may not have, I don't know who's guilty, but someone taking money or something. But someone made a point again. What's the result? He's been saying for 2 years he's going to do a lawsuit against the COVID medical tyranny. Nothing's happened. So it's almost like another version of Q, where people were pacified. Instead of launching real lawsuits locally, regionally, nationally, internationally, they just thought, okay, Reiner's going to do it. And in the end, nothing happens. So again, a lot of, this sort of stuff going on, and this cultish and religious feverish zeal for a man, right? Trump. And I don't think any man warrants such a following. And as soon as you get something like this, I'm like, whoa,
It's I had shared a tweet from, I can't even remember what his name is now. It was a screen grab. But this individual, he's kind of he has kind of a big following in the Twitter sphere. And he said that apart from Christ, there has been no greater person to live than Donald Trump.
Yeah, I've seen like a lot of these things. Yeah.
And I was just like, first of all, to even name Donald Trump in the same sentence as you would Christ in that perspective, and say that apart from, like, if there had been no Jesus, Donald Trump would have been the best person that ever lived. I don't care who you are. I don't care how much you like the guy. That's asinine and idolatrous.
Yeah, that's another key word. This is idolatry as well.
You had mentioned cultic and whatnot, but you also brought up the word or the descriptor of Gnostic or Gnosticism. Now I know that you and I both know what Gnosticism is. We could, that'd be a whole series of shows. But for an overview and in the similarities of what you're seeing in the Q phenomenon and with Gnosticism, can you give the audience just a brief overview of what Gnosticism is and why they're similar?
I would just use the basic definition. It says possessing knowledge, especially esoteric knowledge of spiritual matters. It's the word noun is a member of any of certain sects among the early Christians. I don't think they were truly Christian who claimed to have superior knowledge, and that's very much you look at like the Masons or pagan New Age stuff. It's all very Gnostic. They're always like, and one of my things I'm coming to realize now, and this is sort of like going beyond the Overton window in independent media, because a lot of independent media is not Christian, and they frown on Christian talk. And you can see some of them openly saying this, like I'll just use an example. Derek Rose of Conscious Resistance. I like his work.
Right.
I might go to his Greater Reset conference, but I saw him commenting on his channel, basically poo-pooing and looking at with disdain, looking at Christianity, and defending New Age consciousness stuff that they're all talking about. And I'm starting to realize that this alt media movement, let's say of the past decade or two, initially it started out looking at like 9/11 Fed, all of this sort of within the normal sphere of things, economy, politics, and now it's almost become a Gnostic movement itself, alternative media. It's like almost Gnostic, and now you're starting to pick up all these signals. I can pull a thread together where so many independent media people are now talking about consciousness and vibrations and standing in your truth and finding inside you. This is all anti-Christian principles, and a lot of these people pretend to be Christians, yet they're espousing all of these things. And so there's like I feel like there's a deception going on here, and it's leading people slowly away from the real truth. And so it's like a deception. It's a counterfeit. It's a false. And the Bible talks about this in the last days. There'd be this sort of thing increasingly going on. So this is sort of where I'm going towards with the QAnon stuff. And just I had some notes. I just mentioned. I don't know if you've heard of Donnie Darkened on Twitter.
Yeah. I heard there again. There's a lot of stuff on Twitter, so I see things in passing. But go ahead.
It is well worth your time. I think he really nails it. It may not be all true what he says, but it's a Donnie Darkins, and there's a ministry called E511. I think they basically lay it all out. And what else was it going to?
You'll have to link those to me in Twitter Messenger.
Yeah. And here's my point is that now you're starting to see QAnon comes on the scene, and then soon after you start getting this flat Earth stuff. Now you've got the no virus people, and again, it's all okay, to research these things, but these people are starting to become aggressive in their flat. The Earth is flat. They're starting to become very aggressive, and there's no virus. I see them on my comments, just poking and just not incessantly, talking about get someone on to talk about no virus. Well, I mean, my podcast is Geopolitics and Empire. It's not geopolitics and no viruses or something. And so it's not your own channel.
And the empire of no viruses.
Yeah, and then a lot of these people, these flat Earth people, they say they're Christian flat earthers or Christian no virusers. And my issue with the no virus is I'm not on board with Big Pharma or Rockefeller Medicine. None of that. I'm no vax. So I get that. But then they go on to say that there's no such thing as contagious disease or infectious disease. I've seen some of them say that. And it's like, well, the Bible talks about pestilences and plagues. If you know basic history, I mean, I've experienced it myself. I used the classic example. I got sick with pneumonia 5 years ago, started coughing up blood here in Mexico. I never been in a hospital. And one of our elderly friends and their husband, this couple came and took us to their doctor. The next day, the woman got sick, the husband got sick, their kid got sick. That's infectious disease. That's contagion. I don't care. It's a personal experience. And so I feel like you see this thread now with QAnon, and then they're starting to make, and the Bible says the earth is a sphere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how can you, again, if you're a Christian flat earther, well, now you're going against the Bible. If you're a Christian no viruser, Bible talks about pestilence and plague. So you see
Right.
kind of where it's going now. It's almost like another version of postmodernism where they can
Yep.
get you to believe anything now. Truth is no longer truth. And now they can get you to believe anything. And I'm just worried this is
Well,
gonna keep going. And then where are they going to go next? They're going to make you think other things that are true are not true.
well, in what you said is that there is no truth except for their truth. And if you deny their truth, then you don't know truth. Because you haven't, and this goes back to the Gnosticism, because you haven't spent the amount of time that I've spent digging into this clearly, because if you did, you'd agree with me. And since you don't agree with me, you haven't dug into it. And it's this circular logic of you have to believe this because I believe this, because I've dug into it a lot more than you. And they're at that point now where no matter how much you dig into it, they're always going to have more time into it than you. And they're always going to be a level ahead of you. And that then, like you said, I've started to see an uptick. Now, there were flat earthers out there before Q became a thing, but it has exploded the flat earth argument into the stratosphere, along with other aspects of other things, like you were saying, the people who deny that there is such a thing as infectious disease or virus or whatnot. And all of those have become linchpins for those people who profess to be Christian, who follow this movement, have now become linchpins of your Christianity and your salvation. So I literally had people like accuse me of, you don't even know God. And I'm like, why? Well, because if you did, you'd believe this. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. You're like literally adding a work to my salvation. And while I don't have these kind of conversations a lot on this particular, even though the Black Robe Regiment has the religious overtones to the American War for Independence, we don't have this conversation all the time. And that's why I really wanted to have it with you first, is that you can disagree with someone. Like Monica's Roman Catholic. We've both had conversations with her. I had her on my show. She's been on yours. You've been on hers. We might have some differences on some soteriological distinctions, but I could still have that conversation with someone. I've had atheists on. I've had conservative homosexuals on. We can have differences, agree on a lot of things, and not get into the aspect of accusation that comes with so many of the people in the movement across the board. If you doubt anything, you are immediately a problem.
I mean, that sounds like a cultish behavior where, just like you, over the years, over the many countries I've lived in, people that I've been very friendly with, we'd have intense conversations with hardcore atheists who are trying to unconvert me. I've had a classmate that was a hardcore Muslim trying to convert me to Islam, and I was trying to convert him to Christianity, but we were always respecting each other. It never came into my mind to attack someone, insult someone ad hominem. And so, yeah, I mean, and even just this morning on a slight tangent, someone, I don't know what was in my Telegram channel of Geopolitics Empire was talking about KJV only, King James Version only. And I'm like, use KJV only. And I'm like, well, so I can't read my Bible in Spanish or Croatian? So then people are saved by KJV only? Like all these people who want to learn about the gospel in a foreign country,
Yeah.
they have to learn English to be saved. Like, it's just nonsense. And
Oh, those people are real.
yeah,
I know people like that.
I've lived in foreign countries like Mongolia. The funniest thing, when I was in Peace Corps, Mongolia is 90% Buddhist shamanist. It's got the lowest population density as a country in the planet. Big open space with 3 or 4 million people. They throw me in the Gobi Desert, in a little village of like 500 people. What are the chances that there happens to be a Baptist church there, run by Mongolians? How are they going to learn about the gospel? Through KGV only? No, they've got a Mongolian translated into Mongolian, and so again, it just doesn't make any sense. So.
Well, I've met people who have said, like, what you have to do is you have to teach these people to speak English and read English so they can then read the Bible. I've had people say that to me, and I'm like, well, why not get it for them in their own language? But but I think it's not so much a tangent as it is a thread that ties into there again. It goes back to the cultic mentality of you have to do it our way. You have to see things our way, or you're an enemy. And I had a gal. I had no idea who she even was. I've been paying attention to a couple of things that are kind of kicking up dust over in the western reaches of the state of Minnesota, and this gal comes in and she just kind of out of the blue comments and says, "That's because your entire sheriff's office and police department are made up of such and such. But don't worry, they're going to be gone soon. The Department of Justice is on the way." And I had made the comment, You trust the Department of Justice right now? This is the same Department of Justice that's arresting and prosecuting and persecuting Trump and his supporters.
And just speaking of arrests, like, another point is all of these apparent, obvious grifters and charlatans that are involved with the job. Like, you've seen these big channels, like these Charlie Wards, and I don't even know all of their names, Simon Perez or something, Parks, Charlie Ward, and everything they've been saying for the last 2 years, none of it has come true. And they're just grifting. And again, there's none of these arrests. But here's the interesting thing, though, what Donnie Darkin posits. I think it's a plausible scenario. Again, I hold all these different scenarios in my mind when it comes to geopolitics and this stuff we're talking about. And I don't cling to it like feverishly. Like, I've got these different scenarios. Maybe this one will happen or partially, and I'll discard it over time. But he really posits, I think, that Trump will come back, and I think there's a good chance that in 2024 Trump will return, because all of this is very much like WWF, reality TV, which he was involved in, right? Trump is very well versed, and he was in the, he participated in WWF.
Didn't he actually get in the ring at one time?
Yeah, and so like this whole thing just seems like a global WWF reality show that we are all participating in, and I think it's going to come back like in a soap opera, like in a reality show. And Donnie Darkin posits, and I think this makes a lot of sense. Terry Wolf, who's up in Canada, young guy, author. I talk to him every week on my TNT show. I think he agrees as well. So Donnie Darkin posits that what we're seeing now, this new world order, great reset, dystopian dictator, that Trump, or maybe Q with Trump or something like that, the Patriots are going to come and defeat. We see Putin now sort of leading the charge. Yesterday he said, like, the West is Satanist, and yeah, all of this is true. This new world order.
Shit. No arguments, bro.
I mean, it's true. The West, the whole system, it's true, and so
doesn't mean Putin's better. He's just right.
Right. Yeah. And so apparently this will be attacked and taken down. It's not going to succeed. Maybe Trump comes back and defeats the Great Reset with Putin or whatnot. And then it's like everyone celebrates, like, we won. And then it's this new age, right? And then it seems like we've defeated the evil and we've won, and there's going to be peace, happy ending. And it's like, no, that will be the real, new world order. Because if you think about it, Lucifer won't come back, with his horns and red, devil. He's going to appear as
angel of light.
Right. So again, it's just that, of course. So the greatest fear is that, this this new world order, is because it's all going to be deception. It's all deception. The Bible talks about just increase. It's going to be a deception so great that even Christians will fall for it, which is what you were alluding to with so many QAnon people who are Christians falling for these deceptions, or even many Christians falling for the COVID, deception. Just is one after another. It's getting
Yeah.
so sophisticated.
Well, in that gal that I had mentioned when she said the DOJ was going to swoop in and arrest all these corrupt cops, I'm like, and I asked, so the same DOJ that went after Trump, and her immediate response, and I knew immediately what I was dealing with, was, "Oh, the DOJ's already been gutted. It's all new leadership. The storm is coming. You'll find out very soon when they show up at your door." And the accusation in that was both an accusation and a threat, because I denounced her prediction that the DOJ has been cleaned and is now full of the white hats, which just blows my mind. I have just announced myself as an enemy, and they're coming for me now too. So, like, she literally said, "You'll see when we show up for you." I was like, "What?
It parallels the COVIDian cult, and I've actually heard with my own ears the disputes between people who were not vaccinated and people who were jabbed, with the COVID stuff. And I mean, from my perspective, I've never taken one of those things, but I hope the people who have taken it, nothing bad happens to them.
Right.
But we are seeing bad things happen to them, and I've heard someone who was jabbed, I don't know how many times, wish death. We've seen this in social media, right? Like the jabbed wishing death upon the unvaccinated. But I've seen it, heard it with my own ears, and it's the same parallel with what you're saying. Oh, they've bought into this ideology, and it's almost like a defense mechanism where they're afraid of being wrong, being sold on this whole thing that was completely wrong, and they might actually be in danger. So they double down on their Stockholm syndrome and would rather wish you death or threaten you to defend their ideology.
Do you, or I shouldn't say do you, I'm sure you've seen where it, even in mainstream media now, places like Fox News and others, a lot of the Q stuff is starting to seep in to talking points. And I can't remember, some of the research I did, they were talking about how one of the Fox hosts had said that there will be massive amounts of arrest coming. And it was right after a drop. And so it is permeating, and we're hearing like Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene are using some of that same language. One of the fixations that's coming out of this, which is really hard for me to say I'm against, but it's problematic in that they're very much, somehow all of this stuff is all tied into child sex trafficking. Like the almost like the entire goal of the deep state is just to have pedophilic sex with your child. That your child is a target, and they link everything to child sex trafficking. And so even like if you remember Pizzagate preceded Q, but it was really kind of part of that uprising. But now everything is linked to that. And if you remember a couple of years ago with Wayfair having, been accused of selling children through their website, people were like, see, this is all child sex trafficking. And people were trying to buy these really expensive, cabinets because they were going to rescue children. And that thread keeps coming out. It's constantly coming out. Do you see that as they almost have to make, white hat heroes? They have to make up a problem for them to solve. And I'm not saying there isn't child sex trafficking. We know that there is. We know there is human trafficking. But do they almost have to make up another level of evil every single time something doesn't bear out, so that they can continue to justify holding on to that hope?
I mean, it could be part of it. We see the powers that be do the same thing, creating pretext to keep the of international terrorism, which I don't think really it doesn't really exist, to keep the global war on terror going. They're creating pretexts of domestic terror to roll out domestic extremist offices all across the land. The domestic war on terror, the sequel, climate change, pandemics that don't exist. I don't think by definition we were not in a pandemic the last couple uh, years, and so. But I think that stuff does go on. What you're saying, the child stuff it does exist. It's probably the politicians are involved with that. Whitney Webb wrote a new book touching on that. I just my point would be just going back to what you're saying about the arrests. Like it's like talk to me in a year or two, and we'll see, how Donnie Darkin and E511 Ministries theory holds out. Maybe we will see arrests coming and Trump coming back, but that would just confirm the theory of what I'm saying, that people would cheer. Well, people are cheering the return of Trump and this apparent defeat of the New World Order. I'm going to be like, oh, all right, the show is just getting started. You know what I'm saying? And so people are going to be deceived. And so maybe they'll bring in, and there might be a time of peace because the Bible talks about the prophecy where maybe there will be this new regime, and it's going to seem like, oh, they're going to remove the social media, censorship. We're going to have more freedom. But maybe they will sell some sort of Nisara, digital system. And then only later they'll take their mask off again and, start going after dissidents. So again, we'll see in a year or two how things go, or 3. But I think there definitely is child, trafficking.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It doesn't, yeah. Well, some of the really out there things are, these children are being trafficked so that their blood can be drained. There's adrenochrome. Um, they're taking the adrenochrome from the children and giving it to people like Nancy Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren and others to keep them refreshed and rejuvenated. And I mean, these are things that people believe. They really do.
They could very well be true. It's just from my perspective, I don't think it's healthy to spend every waking moment, pursuing these lines of research. And I look at other stuff like geopolitics, and a lot of this stuff you can't corroborate. How am I going to find, I can study Gulf of Tonkin declassified documents. I can study 9/11, World Trade Center 7, architects and engineers, things like this. But I have to find an actual elite to tell me.
Right.
There's like no document about adrenochrome.
And that's the thing there, if it's really happening, the elite's not going to tell you. And so Tina said it may well be the New World Order. I believe she's referring to what you were saying about what happens if they do rush in and are able to change everything. But what else are we supposed to do? WEF isn't the way to go either. I think we'd both agree that nobody really wants us to have anything else to do with the World Economic Forum. I mean, that's for darn sure. But I don't think that. I think what my perspective on this is, and I'll use it this way. Everybody on the eve of the election of 2020, and then right after, a lot of people on the right were demanding that Trump invoke martial law.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted Trump to shut down the entire country, like lock it down, send the military in. We're going to, you need to sweep in and arrest all of the Democrats and any other Republicans who aren't playing ball. If you're on the street, you're subject to arrest. They were cheering for this. They were absolutely 100% behind it because it was the right thing to do, because they wanted Trump in office. And I think any reasonable person would have much rather had Trump than Biden. Not like there's just like, if you wanted Biden over Trump, you're just irrational. I'm sorry. But especially when you see them today. But the problem is, and it gives lie to the reality of what you were saying, which is they honestly want the exact thing that they're fighting against. Just they want it their way. They'd be okay with a new world order as long as it's their new world order. That leftists were eliminated and everybody had a gun and there was, you had no liberty to do or say anything that went against their narrative. They would be okay with that.
I mean, that's what the leftists are doing now, anyways.
Right.
I've said in this was years ago at an international relations conference at a university. Undergraduate students, the department director, whatever, one of the guests, the main speakers. This was, I think, right before the election, 2016, and everyone was. I was like the only conservative in the room. There's like 20 students. Everyone's. Imagine this: the department, the guest speaker, 20 students, all left-wing progressives, all want Hillary Clinton. And I'm the only person like that doesn't want Hillary Clinton. I didn't say anything, but they all were talking openly how they would be fine with cheating on the election to get Hillary in and not to get Trump. They were openly saying like, yeah, we should cheat, forget democracy to have our way. And that's what I like. I have interviewed Dr. Robert Epstein, big figure. He's a Democrat, and he got angry. He said, as a Democrat, I don't think. And they stole, it's, I don't know if this is going to go out to your YouTube. I can't say you'll get the shenanigans happen around.
Yes, they're very good. Very the shenanigans. Yes,
the thing in 2016, and the Democrat Robert Epstein, he wasn't on board with that. Even if it was going his, or in 2020, if it was going his way as a Democrat, he didn't approve because manipulations going on, and so that's how I think we should be. But yeah, as you say, the left is doing it now. And
the right for the most part, especially people following this Q phenomenon, they're okay with the same type of militarization and force that they're terrified of being used on them, as long as they're the ones in control of it and are using it on their opponents. And that to me is one of probably the most emblematic statements, is that, oh yeah, we're all for it. Yeah, go ahead, sweep in military tribunals, lock them up, put them in Guantanamo. I mean, I was listening to another person who has family members that are sucked into this. Sends him links all the time, and he just forwards them to me to torture me. So he had me. He was listening to this one. And so I was listening, and they were literally like kind of reading the tea leaves of airplanes flying over them at a conference. And like every once in a while, I'll get what are clearly special ops aircraft in our area, because they're, there's pretty decent contingency of not special ops, but National Guard and reserve units kind of in this section around Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. And so when I see certain types of aircraft, having been in the military, I'm like, oh, well, that's what, this is. I don't get excited and see that and go, oh, they're coming to rescue me from the evil of the world. Sometimes I go, why are they flying around my neighborhood? They were sitting here reading the tea leaves of these aircraft flying over their convention, saying, oh, and that plane right there, that's a special air mission plane coming from the from the State Department, headed to such and such to arrest so and so to take them down to the camps in Guantanamo, and there are barges in Guantanamo ready to hold all these thousands of prisoners. That's literally what they were saying. And now they can just utter these things and spit these things out, and it becomes a talking point that bleeds into regular social media and regular conversations. And I'm saying that because it goes to what you were saying, which is then they will become the new world order.
I wasn't easy when the martial law talk was coming out, and I'm like, for Trump to institute martial law, I'm not sure about that. And the whole Operation Warp Speed. I
Yep.
mean, it was under his presidency they launched, one of the key things that were needed for this lockdown. But another interesting point this Donnie Darkin character brings up. He says the Great Reset is clearly and blatantly evil because it's designed to lead people to the false light of the Great Awakening. He calls it it's a very powerful deception and an example of the Masonic Hegelian dialectic from dark to light. The beast will rise from the false light, and you see all of this talk in the QAnon where we was it where we go one, we go all.
Yeah.
Great awakening, these great awakening tours, and just awakening. That language is very occult and esoteric, and he goes on to detail Donnie Darkin. He talks about Alice Bailey, Helena Blavatsky, the Theosophy. Here's another post. He says, "Do not be deceived by this false spiritual war between good and evil. Understand that the beast comes as a counterfeit of Christ to establish a counterfeit kingdom, the same one that occultists like Alice Bailey have been speaking of for decades." Alice Bailey wrote a century ago, she said, "It's time that the church woke up to its true mission to materialize the kingdom of God on earth, today, here and now. That the time has passed wherein we can emphasize a future and coming kingdom. People are no longer interested in a possibly heavenly state or a probable hell." Again, that this idea will take people to hell because they're not concerned about salvation. And I've been to Lutz's Trust meeting. I mentioned this over. There's the Lucifer Publishing Company, founded in 1922 by Alice Bailey. Changed its name to Lutz's Trust. They got 3 offices: New York, London, and Geneva. I studied in Geneva. I went to one of their meetings at their offices. I still have the pamphlet that I got from that meeting from 2009. It talks about they believe Lucifer is the Messiah. They refer to Lucifer as Prometheus, bringing fire to mankind. And so Lutz's Trust, they're official United Nations NGO. They're part of the I suppose they manage the meditation room in the UN New York building. You read their material, they believe Lucifer is the Christ. They also call him the Maitreya, the Mahdi, the Buddha. To the Buddhists, he's the savior. And they're preparing for his return. And if you read their newsletters, they say, like, let's pray, let's meditate for Davos, for the World Economic Forum to succeed in what they're doing. They literally say, let's pray for the UN, for the WEF, for Agenda 2030, for UNESCO. And so it very much kind of lines up with this Q stuff, which is about lights and New Age and
they're bringing in we have the light, we have the real light, and they talk that language is like, we're going to go from the darkness to the light, from the darkness to the light, and all that I see in that is one, failed prophecy, and the argument that Q never predicts anything, only the bakers predict. Well, the Q encourages the bakers, tells them to keep doing what they're doing. So he's on board with what it is on board with what the bakers are doing. But they do go, they are right now, they're in the dark because they're being pushed down, but they're going to bring the light. And so, yeah, they're really two sides of the same coin. And so one of the viewers asked this, and I want to say this carefully because I don't want this to come off as a harsh cutoff. But so when you say, what's your take on these U.S. underwater drones at Denmark where their pipelines got destroyed? Well, here's exactly one of the problems. We now have to read everything, not just from a geopolitical and empire perspective, but now we have to look for the deeper meaning behind every single thing that happens. So if there's underwater drones in the sea, American unmanned underwater vehicles doing this thing, then what's really happening? It could just be that the United States regime, as it is right now, the West, wants to provoke a war with Russia. And so they went down there and planted explosives on the pipeline and blew it up. That could be, but I don't know that we have to have a take. because that's what everybody thinks they have to have now. You have to have an interpretation of everything. And sometimes the simplest look at something is all that it is. It's a simple look. Period.
I disagree with the idea that, like, there are all these analysts, and like I can't say what happened. How can anyone say? When I see people who are even popular in independent media say this is what happened, I tend to take them less seriously because, again, as I said earlier, I have these different scenarios in my mind that are possible. Some, gain more points, others less, and sure, I think it is possible that the Russians could have carried out a false flag operation. I was looking on Twitter at General Spalding, Robert Spalding, who's a big figure, and he was alluding to that. The Russians have done it before, I believe, like 1999 Moscow apartment bombings. I believe those were Russian false flags, as have the Americans with 9/11. Many countries, it's a standard operating procedure for any state, and so
and Russia certainly could have blown up their own pipeline, but guess what? The U.S. and NATO could have done it too.
Right, and then as of now, the evidence leans more. You had Condoleezza Rice in 2014 talking about this stuff. Victoria Nuland, Biden. In September, the U.S. choppers were hovering over the region. You've had these BALTOPS exercises, and so all of that evidence tends to say the West did it, as you say, to provoke war. Could it have been the Russians? Maybe, because Robert Spalding said that what the Russians would get out of it is it would make everyone think the Americans did it and just weaken even more Western institutions, because everyone now is just losing faith in the whole Western system, in many ways rightfully so, because of all of the things that they've been perpetrating with all of these corrupt wars, killing millions of people. So yeah, I don't know, but I like to say this seems like the scenario, but I'm not sure. So,
do you, going back to the Operation Truth in the early days of the Bolshevik Revolution, and then into the communist takeover of Russia, do you see similarities that really do tie into Q being actual intelligence operatives being involved? Because the next one of the next guests I'm going to have on, and so I'm going to announce this now because I just got confirmation from him yesterday. Professor Michael Rechtenwald.
Oh wow, I've talked to him a couple times. Yeah,
is an incredibly deep thinker. And when I reached out to him, he said, "Oh, I would love," he just immediately kind of gave me like these 2 quick paragraphs of, and then I asked him to come on, and he said, "Sure, I'd love to come on." So he has committed to coming on, and
what's he going to cover with you?
He is going to cover more of the honeypot perspective of this, not just being a group of just kind of miscreants out there, but that it's actually being done as controlled opposition by the deep state.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I think. I mean, this is what I meant earlier, because it's an operation being run by professionals, and I think it's a part of the deep state apparatus. They've probably got, like, you look at the CIA or NSA, then maybe they've got some black ops, room in the corner or something, CIA and NSA, and they're sort of
they clock in and go to their queue room.
No, really, yeah, I mean, this is how. Yeah, I mean, I think the deep state, you've got the facade of what you see as the CIA, and they do all sorts of stuff, and then you've probably got within that, like in the onion, inner cores, that these are the really bad people that are using this. I mean, essentially, if you see the world government that's coming about is being led by the U.S. The CIA is a very globalist institution. It's not a national. You see, they're running color revolutions all around the world to overthrow governments, and then to take these puppet governments and integrate them into the global framework, where once they get every country, they plug it into the World Federation, the world government, and bang, we've got our world government. And that's what they've been trying to do over the last, how many decades. And we've just got a few holdouts, Russia, Syria, Yemen, North Korea, Venezuela, these sorts of countries, Libya, and then so yeah, basically these are globalist institutions, the CIA, IMF, World Bank, all of this stuff that America has. And I've talked to Jay Dyer. I don't know if you have. You should probably have him, get him on. Jay Dyer. He made a good point that
You'll have to help me get a hold of him.
he's that America, and have been great Christian documentaries as well, talking about the founding of America and how actually it was not. I don't believe it was Christian. It was Freemasons, very occult founders of the U.S., and it was supposed to be like this new Atlantis. I think the project was to create this America, and then through America create the world, government. And we're seeing that. I mean, Jefferson was right behind me. I didn't know until recently. Apparently, he wrote a letter early on saying he wanted to integrate all of the Americas into one empire. And yeah, so we've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but
Well, no, but I think I don't know if it's much of a tangent because I still think it speaks to the reality that whether or not you believe in Q isn't really the issue. The issue is what's actually happening, what's actually going on. And we're really only left, if you dispute the validity of Q, we're left with one of two options. It's either a counter movement by the deep state to sucker in people who are waiting for their savior, and which is just going to be another form of a giant centralized power that has the ability to do everything they want done. Or it's a bunch of cons sitting around together saying, hey, let's throw some vaguely mystic, almost technical sounding military type jargon out and get a bunch of people to start, believing this, all based loosely off of a off the cuff statement made by Trump in a press conference in a conference room. I think it was even just in a regular conference room, where he threw out, you know what this is? This is the calm before the storm. And the media, asked him, well, what's that mean, Mr. President? You'll see. It's the calm before the storm. All of a sudden, that language exploded into the darker recesses of social media, and chat rooms. It started with 4chan and others. That became this talking point that has now turned into what we're dealing with now. And all of it is either, again, controlled opposition by the intelligence state, or it's just some hacks in a room causing a problem. No matter what, it's one of those two things. If you don't agree with Q, that means that the people that and care about that are sucked into this are being played. And that's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, and there's all this talk of JFK Jr. and Princess Diana, like you're seeing all this crazy stuff come out of the woodwork. And I also think it's important to mention Michael Flynn. Before all of this stuff, I admired Michael Flynn. I don't know where he's at now, but I was teaching foreign policy, and I was trying to show the truth that it's the U.S. and the Europeans and some of the Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia, probably Israel, Qatar, UAE. These are the powers behind international terrorism, Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They support, finance, arm, train ISIS and the jihadis. And we had the Defense Intelligence Agency document. Flynn was the head of the DIA. 2012, it was declassified, basically alluding to the fact that we were supporting the Salafists to carry out regime change in Syria and anywhere we wanted. And I had American students flip out in Mexico, call me anti-American conspiracy theorist. I'm like, it's documented. I mean, there are so many statements from government officials from Afghanistan to Pakistan to Russia to many countries saying this. There was an Iraqi general some years ago who said, if the West would stop financing ISIS in Iraq, tomorrow there would be no ISIS.
Right.
because they don't have the reason. They're basically like mercenaries. They're not this international boogeyman terrorist movement. And my point with Flynn was like, I was using his material in my classroom back then to talk about this. And then I don't know if you saw, it was like a year or two ago, I don't remember when, Flynn gave this speech at some awakening tour talking about, like, I think it was like 7 points of light or some very new agey thing. And someone found a clip from like 20 years ago from this new, I forget the name of this woman, some very like theosophist, new age, that's basically pagan, in my mind, occult Satanist, Luciferian. She was giving this prayer. It was literally almost word for word the prayer that Flynn was giving. So how can he be Christian? How he's basically praying a new age prayer, but pertaining to be nominally Christian. So it's a lot of weird stuff going on, and so much that I'm just really not on board with any of this.
Yeah, it's really hard to be in a position where you're willing to call out and recognize that things like the WEF and the WHO and the UN and NATO and all of these things are all intertwined, and they're all wrapped up in perpetuating empire and perpetuating a global rising of a one world government. I mean, it's hard to come out and speak against those things, and then also have to turn around and look at people who should allegedly be on your side and say, but wait a minute, you are not any better. In the sense of, I know that your hope is for better things, but what you're putting your hope in is a sham. And so you call that out, and much like you, well, you're anti-American. Well, no, I'm not. I'm not anti-American. You brought up like Yemen being a holdout. Well, look what we're doing to Yemen. Ask the esteemed Mr. Horton from antiwar.com. I mean, he's kind of written some of the definitive historical takedown of especially modern American foreign policy for the last 100 years, really.
Yeah, he's been on my podcast. Yeah.
We've got to be able to step outside of these things and recognize and see problems from both sides of this burgeoning civil war. So somebody said, do you think that a split in America is possible to avoid a civil war? Like, we are already in a civil war in the United States. We have two factions that are vying for control of the centralized government. It may not be a shooting war, but we're in it. And right now, the two sides that are fighting against each other are really aiming for the same goal. They want total supreme control. The Trump side wants supreme control. If they could put Trump in for life, they would. They would, because they do see him as the God King.
Well, this is my fear, and again, people like Donnie Darkin talk about this. Is this pendulum swing where they're trying to make this left-wing Great Reset, horrible dictatorship, swing it so far to the left, like it's so it's so off the walls, with the transgender stuff, with all of this just insane. It's like it's so comically insane, all of these things that they're doing, and because then they want the pendulum to swing to the other extreme, to the right. And this is what I fear, if like Trump would come back in 2024 and apparently save us, but it might be like a 1930s Nazi, Hitler moment where Trump comes back and then he's got the veneer of being Christian and then becomes authoritarian. And then, it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Everyone's going to think he's this Christian dictator, which he's not Christian. He would be a dictator. I mean, I'm saying this is one scenario. Again, I'm
right. Yeah, absolutely.
But it just seems like an extrapolation of like what happened in Germany, where things just collapsed, and then they came to power, and then they just went off to one crazy extreme. And the same thing could happen in the U.S., I fear. But it would be just in the name. But the whole world they would be pretend conservatives, and the whole world would just go against. Throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, "Oh, Christians are crazy," and
Well, we are though. I mean, let's just be honest. We are.
According to the world, yeah.
um, but I think, and that's been my concern is this absolute allegiance to that this movement has drummed up this uh, rabid support where you cannot even mention anything that Trump has done that hasn't been good. I pointed out that better than Biden, but he wasn't this perfect anti deep stater outsider that everybody thinks he was, and I said, and he made a lot of mistakes. I mean, he continued the bombing in Yemen. Somebody was, well, he didn't start any new wars. I'm like, he didn't get us out of any wars either, and he did bomb Syria, a completely sovereign nation, and he allowed himself to be duped into putting troops on the ground in Syria. And
He's just another president. I mean, he's just the president. Like, I don't.
yeah,
Why should I hold anyone? I mean, I think Ron Paul is great, but it's not like I don't think of. I've interviewed his Daniel McAdams and Chris Rossini, who joins Ron Paul every Friday on the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Ron Paul is great, but I've got his books. I don't. But I don't spend all my time thinking about Ron Paul. I listen to.
what can you do to get Ron Paul in office? We could have a Ron Paul Anon.
Yeah, I think it's way past that
RP Anon.
for him. But yeah.
But
But
that's
pretty
the
much
thing, is it's that absolute messianic style mindset of you cannot critique anything that he's done, because if you do, then you might expose the emperor's not wearing any clothes.
exactly.
And it really is it that I think is what bothers me, and I was glad to hear you say it, is that I do see that pendulum swing of he was accused for years, leading up to, his election, and then into, in the election of 2020, he's just Hitler, and you and I are sitting here going, like, literally nothing like Hitler, nothing. I mean, like, he's not even that charismatic. So, like, say what you want, Hitler had some charisma, maybe bad, but he had some charisma. But he's literally not Hitler. But I really do think that this push could turn him into a caricature of that, if they really did get what they wanted, which is this massive military coup in the United States. And I don't think people understand just how severe and dangerous and bloody what they're holding out for will be if they get what they want. It's as bad, if not worse, than what the left is doing.
And the other potential context to nominally justify that would be war with China or Russia. If you are in a state of war, then you're in emergency, powers, and there's no more constitution. And sorry, we're at war with China, Russia, World War III, whatever, and so they can do whatever they want.
Right. And that's the thing. We're very much afraid of, we have people who are afraid that they're going to turn the internet off tomorrow, or, they're going to lock us all in our houses before the next election. So there is no election. Imagine if you get your way and you get another supposed right winger in there and they are surrounded by war hawks. What do you think will happen then? And so do you see, I mean, you and I would both have the same perspective that there is hope for these people that are following it. And one of them was what you said, which is, when's the last time you actually had, you were in your Bible as long as you were in doing these, following all these threads that are coming out in these Q drops and these postings from the bakers and stuff. So that is definitely a way for people to be extracted from it. But do you think that there's a level of disillusionment that could happen? Or do you think that the longer it goes on and things aren't playing out the way they're predicted to, that disillusionment won't happen as much as doubling down will?
I think all of it will happen. You'll have some people probably doubling down forever, continuing with this, others that will just lose interest, and others that will realize what's going on. And again, I think it also depends what I mentioned earlier, what might happen in the next year or two. Maybe some of this stuff will start happening, but it's part of some deception. Maybe none of it's going to happen, and we'll fall under a democratic Bolshevik tyranny. And yeah, I don't know. Even myself, like I guess as you get older, like I love doing my podcast and my TNT show, but I'm just spending less. You get older, you get tired, you have other personal obligations. It's like I'd be just happy leaving my podcast and living on a farm somewhere. It's just like because there's only so much you can read about all of these things, and it's just like.
Right.
I go back to the book of like Ecclesiastes, in the Bible, where there's nothing new under the sun. All of this stuff that we're talking about today, these conspiracies, these vying for power, these oligarchies, these cabals have always existed in all of the past empires of the world. There's nothing new. And so there's only so much you can get out of it. Like, okay, I understand. I don't have to spend all day listening to Alex Jones. I could do other productive things, So
Yes, there's a ton more things more productive than listening to Alex Jones all day. A ton of clipping your toenails is more productive than listening to Alex Jones all day.
I mean, I like listening to him from time to time, but again,
Yeah.
the point is like you hang out with your neighbors, friends, work, teach,
Right.
whatever.
My kids are growing now, so like I work all day, and so this is fun time for me. So I do this for fun. You're like, must be nice to just do your show for fun. I have to make money with mine, he says.
Yeah.
Don't trust me, I would like to be making money with mine. That's why when Kent sent the super chat, I was very happy to show it. Thank you, Kent. Being a conservative Christian, you're willing to offer critiques of both sides and take the flaming arrows when they come back at you, because it happens. You get hate from both sides, and I run into that a lot with my stuff as well. Is there a point where you say to yourself, and you've already said that you'd be happy to go be on a farm somewhere, but is there a point where you say to yourself in this that I don't know that the right as the right is now is really any better than the left in the sense of who I want controlling my life?
Well, I see a lot of stuff that's bipartisan. I mean, we basically have one government. Like, I don't buy into the whole. I don't know if you know Legal Man. He's a funny guy. I had him on TNT the other day.
He goes by Legal Man.
Yeah, he didn't use a real name, but he's got a good following. He's got a podcast called The Quash. But
oh, okay, yeah, I've heard of The Quash.
Yeah, I think he's like a lawyer in Texas. But the whole left-right paradigm, everything, this whole deep state military-industrial complex stuff, it's all bipartisan, left-right. They all vote on the wars and all of this stuff, the corona measures, and all of this madness. So I'm just being a Christian. I'm just becoming more. I don't even like to call myself right. That's why I say conservative, because it has connotations that are not explicitly political. I don't like to say I'm right. I'm conservative because, in terms of morals, spiritually and values first, that's more important for me than politics. And I think Jesus had the same approach. He was just like, when Pilate caught him, he's like, if the whole point of what I'm doing, I could just call in angels and we could politically take over the Roman Empire. And it's like, but that's not the point of what I'm doing. It's a spiritual thing, what I'm doing. And I think that's also what we should be doing. So I'm not that interested per se in politics so much anymore, or being right or left wing.
Says the guy with the Geopolitics and Empire show.
Yeah, my thing is more about just understanding what's going on. People will put in the chat like, well, what should we do? What are solutions? Well, I'm like, look, I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. That's all I'm doing. So,
sometimes figuring out what's going on is all that I can muster. That's all I have the energy for. It's like,
Yeah.
and you want a solution? Don't look to me. I screwed up lots of things in my own life. Don't ask me to screw up your world for you too.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny you talk about how much time people spend on things, because that's I'm fortunate in the work that I do now, where I'm able to do deep dives. Not with Monica. Well, it'd be nice to do another deep dive with Monica, but I could do deep dives, for half of my day while I'm working, by listening to books, listening to lectures, listening to shows like yours and others. So I spend about half my day doing that, and then the other half of my day, don't question me, bro. Okay, so when I tell you this, I listen to either like true crime podcasts or mysteries, and I get a kick out of these comedy Dungeons and Dragons shows. They're just comedy shows where they play games of Dungeons and Dragons just for fun, and they just make a joke out of it. And I just do that because it just makes me laugh throughout the day. So I look like a giggling idiot sometimes walking around work listening to the. I spend the first half of my day angry and scowling, and the next half of my day laughing or being amused. And you just have to walk away from it sometimes. You just have to.
Frequently.
And that's. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say. I mean, for me, it's kind of hard. Like I have my daily 2-hour show, and then I have to be scheduling, at least one or two. I didn't have a podcast this week because I was traveling, but scheduling 1 or 2 or 3 podcasts, and plus, there's 10 radio shows plus 1 or 2 or 3 podcasts. That's like anywhere from 10 to 13 shows a week, which is crazy.
And then some rando wants you to come on his show on a Saturday, so you don't even get that.
Well, I'm always happy to, Monica asked me to come on, and from time to time I get these people who are starting up podcasts ask me to come on. I'm always happy to chat with people. I'm not like one of those people like, no, I'm too important. I can't come on your show. So,
and that no one's ever actually told me they're too important. They just ignore me.
Yeah, well, I mean, that happens to me. Like, I send out guest requests and I don't get. Here's a funny one. Like, I met Catherine Austin Fitz. You know her?
Of her, yeah.
Yeah, I met her, and she's like big and I had actually sent an interview request. Maybe it was just to her general page, and I never got a response for her. But then I met her traveling recently, just on a random flight. She was on my flight, and I asked her. I chatted for like a minute, and I asked like if she could come on my podcast, and she said, contact me.
And you're like, I did.
Just
I've tried.
Yeah, it's just funny. So yeah, but now it's like I met you in person. Like, aha, I met you in person. Now you can't say, well, why did you not,
right?
answer
So I appreciate your talking through this with me. I know there will be some people who will have said, well, I thought you were going to give us a big expose, and I'm like, no, I wanted somebody to hear that there are other conservative Christians out there saying it's neither conservative or Christian to be wrapped up in Q.
Like I said, I actually think it's occult, satanic. Sorry, that's my view. But
I don't want you to apologize, because I agree.
I think there's a huge deception going on. I've studied the occult. Like I said, I've been to a Lucis Trust meeting. Alice Bailey, Blavatsky, all of this stuff. Something weird is going on.
And that's why and to be honest with you, it's very easy for people, I'm now starting to get to that place where I go out in public sometimes, especially in my area, and people will go, I know you from somewhere. And that's like, they either know me from the career that I had before this, or as I worked in law enforcement for almost 13 years and in that realm, and lost my career over my show, by the way. And yeah,
you mentioned that, but like because you had a podcast, they like fired you or what?
Because I stood up for people during the shutdowns.
The medical tyranny stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I'll like, well, do you know me from my last career? And they're like, no. And I'm like, what'd you do? And I'm like, well, I work for a sheriff's office. And they're like, no, that's not it. And I said, I have a podcast. You wear a stocking cap, a beanie? And I'm like, yeah, we know you. I'm like, so that happens to me every once in a while now. So it's a little strange. So I do try to walk away, but a lot of what I'm doing with people is like, I do a lot of research on this, but a lot of people also know me because I'm local. And so when I critique something, it's easier for them to come at me in the sense of, well, we know you. Where I really wanted to have someone who nobody I know, like, and I'm not saying nobody I know knows who you are. You just move in a different set of circles and you have a much broader platform than I do. If they want to critique me for being ignorant and uneducated, that's easy. I'm just waiting for somebody to go, yeah, I don't want to tackle that with him because you bring some credible knowledge, and that's why I wanted to get people to be exposed to your content, and I do that oftentimes by having people like you on. Folks, you go listen to his shows. I'm going to tell you, you can critique a lot of stuff about a lot of people. You could critique that he's a Croatian-American-Mexican. I don't even know how that works, but
Hey, I'm a minority. I'm a Mexican. You can't say
you
anything.
can't say anything back.
Can't cancel me.
Right? You can't critique you because you are one of those protected BIPOCs. But you go and listen to his content. You listen to the level of intellect that he brings into his conversations. I mean, he shines on my show easily for sure, for a reason. But you listen to his stuff and listen to the views because he knows there's a conspiracy out there. It's out in the open. It's not a hidden conspiracy. He knows about geopolitical empire, and he knows that there is a group of people, a cabal. He's said it numerous times out there. You go listen to his shows, I guarantee you're not going to find an enemy. And when it's somebody who agrees with you about a lot of things is telling you what you're wrapped up in isn't just not true, it's dangerous and occultic. If you are a professing Christian, you might really, really want to double think and think about extracting yourself from it and plugging yourself into people like TNT, which you can find in the links. Yeah, we got the links in below. We got his TNT and Geopolitics and Empire. So one guest that you haven't had on that you would love to have on.
Me. This is a tough one. I've got a list. I'm just kind of a person where it goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like, I don't hold. For me, every man and woman, regardless of their class or status, is equal. You know? So
Absolutely.
it's just like I don't really have anyone that I'm like hold on such a high horse. So
I kind of fanboyed when I met Scott in person here in Minnesota a couple of weeks ago. I will admit that was that I might have been starstruck a little bit, but that's the closest I get.
Yeah, for me, it comes just more like, again, from the Christian perspective. Like,
Yeah.
It's we're all men, we're all sinful, we're all gonna die and stand before the Creator, and it's like nothing is special in any of us. And yeah, there are people who do great things, and but I don't like to kiss anyone's
Rear end.
and so you know.
But there's got to be one person that you would love to land that you know would either be a really fun conversation or would just be explosive.
For fun, I sending like twice recently. I sent an interview request for Alex Jones, and I used in the email. I said, back in 2020, I did the first interview with Dr. Francis Boyle, the Bioweapons Act author, on the topic of Corona. I was the first to get his opinion on Corona, and that interview went viral. And then the next day, my face was on the front page of InfoWars, and
because you had Dr. Boyle on.
So I had this explosive interview, January 2020, and Alex Jones was playing my interview and stopping it and deconstructing it. And I thought, well, maybe the fact that I've been on the front page of InfoWars would be something. And Alex Jones was deconstructing my interview. Maybe I could get a interview. So that'd be something sort of fun, like someone like Alex Jones, or I like also try to find for more obscure guests. I don't like to do just an example, Peter McCullough. He's great. I'm going to look to get him on, but he's done 50 interviews on the circuit. He's going to tell the same thing to my podcast as he's told others. And so I try to find like obscure foreign intellectuals that no one's heard of, that are intellectuals, academics, or experts in their field,
Mm-hmm.
and bring them on to give us this like breath of fresh air. I had Thierry Masson, French intellectual, wrote an explosive book on 9/11 20 years ago. He runs the Voltaire Network, which is widely read. No one in the American media's talked to him, and I brought him on. Or this Swiss Guy Metton, this Swiss journalist and politician. You know what I'm saying? Like Swiss, French,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's sort of my shtick.
Well, and that's what I do. I have several series. I have a Libertarian Lowdown where I bring strong libertarians from across the board. I had Spike Cohen.
I've had him on TNT, yeah.
I had Spike on, but I've also had like just what day was it? Wednesday night I had a guy from not little, but I mean running for mayor in the city of Mankato, who is he's a libertarian. I had him on and we talked about his campaign and his views and stuff. And I just want to talk to people because I want people to be exposed to ideas. And the one thing that I have a hard time with, and you might run into this too, is finding someone who adamantly disagrees with me, who's willing to come on and sit down for a conversation. That's, I don't know, maybe not for you, but I have a hard time with that. And because I get critiques all the time. Well, and then I'll say, well, then come on the show and talk. Nope, I don't have time for you. I'm like, well, you just spent the last 30 minutes typing up a response to me. Could you?
Yeah, I mean, my thing is I'm not really, I'm just not interested in doing debate type stuff. I like to, there's a topic that I want to cover and I see someone that's knowledgeable about it and I'll bring them on. And sometimes they'll be left-wing people. And like, I'll have a left-wing guy really good on some foreign policy aspect.
Right.
And he starts talking about climate change and I just kind of like ignore it. Okay, he's like, we need to fight climate change. I'm like, I don't say anything. And just like, okay. And then he goes back to the foreign policy thing that we're talking about. And it's just like, I mean, I just want to learn about from their expertise. And I don't like to bring people on who disagree just to have these debates. I want to figure out what's going on with a certain subject. That's my thing. Like I said, understanding what's going on. And I did have one guy, I won't name his name. I don't even remember exactly his name, but his agent 3 times kept pestering to get him on. And he's like I don't know, British or American. He's got a really great voice, but he's like doing alternative media now. But I looked him up on the socials. Literally on every single point, he's the diametric opposite of probably yourself and myself. He's like full-on climate change, full-on Trump is a Nazi, full-on January 6th was an insurrection, full-on, COVID-19 84, masks. I'm like, well, what am I going to talk about with this guy? And why does he want to come on? Like, if he knows, like, something else must be, he's probably much more eloquent than me, and he could probably catch me up on stuff. But I'm like, I don't see, why would he want to come on my podcast if we're the completely opposite? What are we going to talk about? So that was kind of weird. So.
Yeah, no, for me, it's not about the debate. It's about getting people to see that you can have a conversation in a way where sometimes the disagreement through social media is so easy to have it in a way that's hostile. Whereas if you're sitting down, even in this venue, it's very difficult to be angry at the person on the other end and treat them poorly. But then again, there are shows that specialize in that. So at yelling at their detractors and even their fans sometimes. So, but I know you got some stuff to do this afternoon and you've probably already talked your voice into needing a trip for rehabilitation. So I really appreciate you sharing like I said, your thoughts. I knew that we weren't going to do a deep dive into proving exactly who it is that's doing it. But I wanted to have people see that it is possible, like I said a few minutes ago, to come at the topic of Q and say it's dangerous and still say a lot of what the people who follow Q believe is valid in the sense of there is a problem. So I hope that this will send people over to your content. I love it when my audience watches other people. I know I should probably keep them selfishly for myself, but I love when people head over and will watch you and watch Monica and watch, Buck on Counterflow and things like that. That's really why I like to bring other people on, is to get my audience exposed to people who are far more intelligent than I am.
I met Buck kind of, but not. He came to the Libertarian Conference in Mexico at the beginning of the year. I don't think I ever actually talked to him, but he was like just right around, hanging around all of us. So I sort of kind of met him. I'm going to have to reach out and get him on my program as well.
He's running for city council.
Yeah.
It's a
Interesting. You were talking about?
Oh, no. He's down in Texas. So,
right. Okay.
but yeah, he's running for city council, and it's really weird. I first heard him. I'm like, oh, he's a libertarian. I want to have him on. And then he goes, oh, I'm paleo conservative now. And I'm like,
yeah, there's people leaving libertarianism, like Pete Quinones. I talked with Jose Nino. There's just Mark McClare, or no, is it Mark Claire, who I've been on his show. He's been on mine. He's also sort of left libertarianism, and so.
Yeah, they've actually they coined the phrase post-libertarianism. And it's funny because a lot of their views are the same, but they're leaving the big L Libertarian Party because they feel like they've got to do something to win. And I'm over here looking at the Libertarian Party in Minnesota going, they more accurately represent me than the Minnesota GOP does. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I really appreciate your time. And if you ever send me some of those, the names in a direct message so I can look them up and start following them and maybe start sharing some of that stuff. And if there's ever anybody else you think I should talk to, I'd love to have the recommendations.
Yeah, or you can see on my archive if you want to ask for someone's contact, and just trust the plan.
That you are not helping me at all. Sorry, you're not helping. And he brings the humor at the end. So I appreciate it. You have a great day. Thanks for your time.
All right. See ya.
See ya. The links to all of his content I shouldn't say all. Links to his pertinent content are in the description of this video. If you are a friend or a viewer or a follower, or however you want to say it, and you follow Q, I want you to understand this is not an attack on you. When I have Professor Rechtenwald on, this is not an attack on you. This is a plea. I believe it is dangerous. I believe at best it's a bunch of guys screwing around in their mom and dad's basement making things up. Next step down is it is people just grifting. At worst, which I think is probably more likely, it is actual controlled opposition. You're being played by the very deep state you think you're going to beat. And I'm not saying that we don't win. In the end, we're not the ones who win. If you're a Christian, in the end, the winner is God. And that doesn't mean we sit back and don't get involved. But like was stated, it's very important. If you spend hours and hours and hours a day looking into all of this to try and figure out what each little piece means and pulling a thread to find this and pulling a thread to get here, and you're going to go and prove that Bush #1 was actually executed for crimes against the Republic, and you're going to prove all of that, and you're going to pull all of these threads and then tell people you could find it too. You just got to be willing to do the work. If you could pull all those threads, you might be spending way too much time on it. And that doesn't mean I don't spend time researching. I do. I spend time researching. I spend time listening to books, reading books, listening to lectures, listening to podcasts on a ton of different topics. But you've got to realize that sooner or later, all of these promises that people that are the bakers especially and the Kewakoks especially are making about how the storm is coming and everything is going to all come to fruition, it's not going to end the way you think it's going to end. And as we talked about throughout the stream, ultimately, it's just replacing one authoritarian New World Order with another authoritarian New World Order. You cannot be okay with your side doing the things that you hate just because they're doing it your way, while you're hating it being done by somebody else. It's not too late for you to extricate yourself from Q. He's not your friend. It's not an ally. Like I said, at best, it's a grift. It's somebody grifting. At worst, it's somebody playing you intentionally for very dangerous reasons. If you haven't yet, head over to Subscribestar. You can find me at Minnesota Black Robe Regiment Podcast on Subscribestar. I would love to have the monthly support. There's several levels. And until next time, my friends, fight for your liberty. It is yours. Fight for your freedom. It belongs to you. And Sic Semper Tyrannis.
We are go for liftoff in T-30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at will.